Confessions of an Anti-Natalist by Jim Crawford. So, anti-natalism, if you don't know, is the philosophical position that it is ethically wrong to create new life, that existence is fundamentally harmful, and that people should abstain from procreation because of that. Now, this viewpoint has a pretty storied history. The basic sentiments behind it have been espoused, I guess, pretty much since human beings have been conscious, like in the Sophocles play, I think it's Oedipus at Colonus, where the character says, "Not to have been born is beyond all estimation best," as well in the Bible. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the author says, "And I thought the dead more fortunate than the living, but better than both is he who has not yet been." You can tell that people, again, essentially, as long as there have been people, have been aware that things would probably just be easier if they hadn't been born. However, this did not really develop into a coherent movement until, I guess you could say, Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer is widely considered to be one of, if not the most pessimistic philosopher ever. And his work is really responsible for actually stating, like explicitly stating, that people should not reproduce because life is just fundamentally wrong. But in recent years, antinatalism has really gained quite a bit of traction, and there are a lot of people who have foregone procreation because they adhere to it, of which I am one. I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiments of antinatalism. Life sucks and then you die. It would be better just not to do it at all. But anyway, Jim Crawford here really outlines the gist of antinatalism in this book of his Confessions of an Antinatalist. Now, Jim Crawford is just a dude. Usually, I feel like there would be some kind of title to this, like David Benatar, probably the most famous antinatalist philosopher working today is a philosopher, as was Arthur Schopenhauer, but not Jim Crawford. No, Jim Crawford is just a guy, a layman, like yours truly, who really adheres to the tenets of antinatalism and would have you know why, and moreover would hopefully convince you to adhere to them too. And so he wrote this book, Confessions of an Antinatalist. It's not a long book, it's actually a pretty breezy read, but it does a really great job of getting across the basic tenets of antinatalism and explaining the rationale behind them. Now, I will say this perhaps is not the most in-depth work on the subject that you can read. If you want to go off into it and explore something that tackles the subject in a bit greater depth, you could try this book right here, Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. This book is a fantastic book and it's very, very thorough in its approach. Or if you really want to, you could try this book right here, The Unbearable Heaviness of Being or Life Reviled. This book is truly like the Bible of antinatalism. I could highly recommend this. I'll put it this way, this book right here walks, this book jogs, but this book right here runs. So if you really want to explore antinatalism, give this one a go. But anyway, so Jim Crawford's book is very colloquial because, again, he's just a guy who wants to get across this viewpoint and explain to you why he thinks it is correct. And this book is part memoir and then part just kind of reflection on his part. And also he treats us to some of his poetry because I believe he is also a poet. And so this book does a good job of both outlining his life and his journey to embracing antinatalism, as well as summarizing some of Schopenhauer's work, as well as David Benatar's work. And again, treating us to some of his poetry, very pessimistic poetry at that. And it's a very fun book. It is a very fun read. And while like I said, I don't really consider this to be maybe the most thorough or in-depth exploration of the topic, he does do one thing that Thomas Ligotti did not do in this book. So Thomas Ligotti's book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, tackles uh, anti-natalism from a pretty much exclusively an atheistic viewpoint, but not Jim Crawford in this book. And that is because, as Jim Crawford explains, he has a background of a certain religiosity. He was involved in a kind of a fundamentalist Christian sect for a while, and then he ended up joining literally like an all-out cult and traveling around spreading doomsday messages and everything. But this gives him a very unique perspective because what I feel that is often not talked about enough is antinatalism from a non-secular viewpoint. Because again, with Thomas Ligotti's book, it doesn't really give any kind of religious thought much shrift. But this book does, absolutely. Again, these books both tackle the subject from a religious viewpoint to some extent as well. Again, definitely give this one a go. But anyway, so what Jim Crawford points out is, well, first of all, he takes a very intensive look at different religious ideologies, one of which is Buddhism. Now, in Thomas Ligotti's book, he does discuss Buddhism to some extent in that book, mostly in a positive light. However, Jim Crawford takes a bit different perspective with it. He gives a rough overview of the basic history and tenets of Buddhism, but then he's just like, nah, it's all crap. It's just people trying to reckon with the fact that they were born, they're going to suffer and ultimately die, and that this is basically, indefensible, really, from an ethical standpoint, and it should not be done. So Jim Crawford really doesn't view Buddhism as being quite so profound as it is kind of a misdirection of one's attention away from the true horror of the issue. But he also takes a hard look at Christianity. And what I found incredibly intriguing about this, incredibly fascinating, is that he kind of highlights a kind of a paradox, if you will, at the heart of Christianity. So, in Genesis, God instructs, Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That is the prime directive of life, is to make babies and reproduce. However, in the book of Matthew, Jesus explicitly says that most people will not make it to heaven. Again, if you subscribe to a Judeo-Christian worldview and you believe in heaven and hell, in the book of Matthew, Jesus says that broad is the way to destruction and narrow is the gate that leads to life, meaning the vast majority of people are going to be just damned to hell for eternity. And what I love so much about Jim Crawford's book is that he really holds that up and he says, what sense does this make ethically if you actually believe this religion? Oh, you're instructed to procreate, reproduce, and create more humans, but yet you're also told in no uncertain terms that the vast majority of those will be consigned to an unimaginably terrible fate for all eternity. And so it really does just pose this extremely valuable question, a quandary. What ethical sense does this make? It's ethically indefensible, basically, as well as all life in general is ethically indefensible, as Jim Crawford goes on in broader terms to elucidate. But the interesting thing about Jim Crawford is that he actually has children. That's right, he committed the unpardonable offense of actually procreating, in which he tells us very, very explicitly that he deeply, deeply regrets doing. But this gives yet another interesting perspective to his argument, is that he sees the pain that he caused by having children, and that his conversion to antinatalism came too late because he had already created two human beings who now have to live and suffer and die because of his choice, not because of their choice. Because again, that's a choice you can't make. And so it's really, there's a real sense of remorse in this book that he expresses, because he's sad that he made the mistake of uh, creating new life when he knows now that you shouldn't. And also, what I like about this book is that this is decidedly un-PC. Like Jim Crawford does not really give much of a damn whose toes he steps on, whose feelings he hurt. And so there are some things that he says in this book that certain people of more sensitive persuasions might find culturally insensitive. But I just respected this book all that much more for it because he really just lays it out there like it is. And again, some of it you might find a little offensive, but maybe you should be confronted with that anyway, because I think there's a lot of truth to what he says in here, even if it might be an unpleasant truth. But yes, I could consider Confessions of an Anti-Natalist by Jim Crawford an excellent, excellent primer into the philosophical waters of anti-natalism. Again, you can pick up this book if you want to explore it further. The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, great, great book, very well written, and does a much more thorough job exploring the topic. But again, if you really want to dive in, I would recommend this book right here, The Unbearable Heaviness of Being. This, again, is like the holy writ of antinatalism. It just covers it, just remarkably well, I think. But yes, Jim Crawford's Confessions of an Anti-Natalist. To rate this book, I'm going to give this book an A. I am. It's not as thorough as the other books, but it's compulsively readable. It really is, and it's not badly written. He actually, despite maybe not having much of an academic background, he definitely can write, and quite well at that. And also, he's quite well read as well, and he really does know what he's talking about when he discusses these different religions and philosophies. He knows what he's talking about. Again, he's a pretty good writer, and this book covers the bases, just maybe not in as great of a depth as they could have. But again, just an excellent jumping off point if you want to learn more about antinatalism and learn why it's wrong to, have children and subject them to things that they have no say over. Give this book a read because it really does a great job of laying it all out there in a kind of a coarse but nonetheless authentic and truthful manner. Great book. I'm going to give this an A. So, Confessions of an Anti-Natalist by Jim Crawford. Have you read Confessions of an Anti-Natalist? Let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. If you have not read Confessions of an Anti-Natalist, I could highly recommend picking this up. I think this is like a book that a lot of people really, really need to read because, again, it's hard truths, but it's truths nonetheless, and it's something that I think the vast majority of people don't want to be confronted with because it illustrates how irrational humans truly are at their base. I mean, as Schopenhauer said, if human reproduction was governed solely by logic and reason, would there even be reproduction? No, because it's not defensible. And this book does an excellent job of saying why that is and covering a lot of the bases. But yeah, and also just let me know what you think of the movement of antinatalism, whether you are a subscriber um, or an opposer. Let me know if you're a pro-natalist, anti-natalist, whatever. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.